We often think that political change happens in the bright, noisy spotlight of elections, protests, and public debates. But what if the most significant and lasting changes are happening in the shadows, driven by a deep, powerful, and largely invisible philosophical blueprint that has been in the works for over half a century? What if there was a coherent, long-term strategy to fundamentally alter the rules of American democracy itself? This is the explosive and deeply controversial thesis of historian Nancy MacLean's book, Democracy in Chains: The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America. This book is not about the day-to-day drama of politics. It is an intellectual detective story. It seeks to uncover the hidden origins and the secret architects of a political movement that, she argues, has one ultimate goal: to place permanent constitutional chains on democracy in order to protect the economic freedom of the wealthy elite from the will of the majority. To be clear, our goal here is not to tell you if Nancy MacLean is right or wrong. Her book has been both praised and fiercely criticized. Our purpose as geeky philosophers is to explore her powerful argument and the profound questions it raises about the very nature of freedom, the role of government, and the epic, often hidden battle of ideas that is shaping our world. The architect, the economist, you've never heard of. The story of Democracy in Chains does not begin in a political campaign headquarters or a corporate boardroom. It begins in the quiet academic world of an economist you have probably never heard of, James McGill Buchanan. Buchanan, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1986, is the intellectual architect at the center of MacLean's entire story. To understand Buchanan, MacLean argues, you have to understand the historical moment that shaped him. In the 1950s, Buchanan was a professor at the University of Virginia during the era of massive resistance to school desegregation. When the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education mandated the integration of public schools, Virginia's political elite fought back. Buchanan was horrified, not necessarily by the integration itself, but by what he saw as an illegitimate overreach of federal power and a violation of states' rights. He saw the will of the majority, expressed through the federal government, as a potential threat to individual liberty. This experience, MacLean contends, became the crucible for his life's work. He developed a new school of thought that came to be known as public choice theory. On the surface, public choice theory is a neutral economic analysis of politics. It simply applies the principles of economics to the actions of politicians, voters, and civil servants. It assumes that these people are not noble public servants but are rational, self-interested actors, just like everyone else. But MacLean argues that Buchanan's version of public choice theory was never just a neutral academic tool, it was a political weapon. If you assume that all government actors are inherently self-interested and that the system is fundamentally corrupt, then the logical conclusion is that the system itself must be constrained. The democratic process, the will of the majority, cannot be trusted, especially when it comes to economic matters. For Buchanan, the greatest threat to a free society was the danger that the takers, the majority of citizens who rely on public services, would use their democratic power to vote for things like public schools, Social Security, and environmental regulations, which would have to be paid for by the makers, the wealthy elite, and corporations. His life's work, according to MacLean, was dedicated to finding a way to stop this from happening. The blueprint, a plan to chain democracy. So how did Buchanan propose to solve this problem of democracy? He didn't believe he could win the argument in the court of public opinion. He knew that programs like Social Security and public education were incredibly popular. So, he developed a more subtle, long-term strategy. The goal was to change the rules of the game itself. The goal was to put permanent constitutional chains on democracy to limit what the majority could ever vote to do. This is the blueprint that MacLean uncovers. It's a multi-pronged strategy designed to weaken the power of the democratic state from the inside out. One key element was the push for constitutional amendments at the state and federal level that would strictly limit taxation and government spending. If the government is constitutionally forbidden from raising enough revenue, it simply cannot fund the popular programs that the majority might want. Another part of the blueprint was the systematic privatization of public goods. Buchanan was an early advocate for school vouchers, not just as a tool for school choice, but as a way to dismantle the public education system, which he saw as a form of government indoctrination. The same logic was applied to Social Security. He and his followers developed detailed plans to move from a public government-run retirement system to a privatized one based on individual investment accounts. The blueprint also called for a relentless attack on labor unions. Unions, in Buchanan's view, were a dangerous cartel that distorted the free market and artificially inflated the power of workers. Weakening unions was a critical step in restoring what he saw as true economic liberty. The ultimate goal of this blueprint, MacLean argues, was to create a kind of minority rule, where the economic liberties of the wealthy minority would be permanently protected from the democratic power of the majority. It was a vision of a society where the market was king, and the role of government was reduced to little more than protecting property rights and enforcing contracts. The patron, Charles Koch, and the creation of a machine. An idea, no matter how powerful, is just an idea until it is backed by money and organization. The second major character in Democracy in Chains is the man who, MacLean argues, took James Buchanan's academic blueprint and turned it into a powerful, well-oiled political machine, the billionaire industrialist, Charles Koch. Charles Koch, along with his brother David, had been involved in libertarian politics for decades, but they were frustrated. They were losing the political battles. They saw their ideas as fringe and unpopular. According to MacLean, everything changed when Charles Koch discovered the work of James Buchanan in the 1970s. In Buchanan's public choice theory, Koch found the intellectual ammunition he had been looking for. It provided a sophisticated Nobel Prize-winning justification for his own deeply held belief that government was a threat to freedom and that his company's interests were the same as the public's interests. Settings: use appropriate media, make the background music calm and relaxed music, add all caps subtitles with a spoken word highlight, use a male clear American voice for the narrator, use geeky as watermark text, don't use iStock. Charles Koch, along with his brother David, had been involved in libertarian politics for decades, but they were frustrated. They saw their ideas as fringe and unpopular. According to MacLean, everything changed when Charles Koch discovered the work of James Buchanan in the 1970s. Beginning in the 1980s, Charles Koch began to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into building a vast and integrated network of institutions to advance this cause. This was not about funding traditional political campaigns. It was a much deeper, more philosophical project. It was about changing the very climate of ideas. The Koch network funded academic centers at universities across the country, like the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, where Buchanan himself was a key figure. These centers gave intellectual legitimacy to their ideas. They funded think tanks like the Cato Institute to turn those academic ideas into concrete policy proposals. And they funded political action groups, like Americans for Prosperity and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, to take those policy proposals and push them into law, primarily at the state level. And they funded political action groups, like Americans for Prosperity and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, to take those policy proposals and push them into law, primarily at the state level. This three-pronged approach, academics, policy, and political action, was a work of strategic genius. It was a long-term plan to shift the entire political landscape. It was, MacLean argues, the operationalization of Buchanan's stealth plan. It was a machine designed to take these radical, unpopular ideas and slowly, methodically, and often invisibly embed them into the very fabric of American law and governance. It was a machine designed to take these radical, unpopular ideas and slowly, methodically, and often invisibly embed them into the very fabric of American law and governance. The stealth plan in action. So what does this stealth plan look like in the real world? MacLean dedicates a significant portion of the book to showing how this machine has worked to implement its agenda over the past few decades, often far from the national spotlight. She points to the long, persistent, and well-funded campaign to privatize Social Security as a prime example. She details how think tanks funded by the Koch network developed the intellectual case for privatization, and how political action groups then pushed this agenda in Washington. She also shows how the strategy has been particularly effective at the state level. She describes how ALEC brings together corporate lobbyists and state legislators to draft model bills, pre-written pieces of legislation that can then be introduced in state houses across the country. She describes how ALEC brings together corporate lobbyists and state legislators to draft model bills, pre-written pieces of legislation that can then be introduced in state houses across the country. These bills often focus on weakening unions, cutting taxes on corporations and the wealthy, deregulating industries, and promoting school voucher programs. Because this happens at the state level, it often flies under the radar of the national media, but over time, it adds up to a fundamental reshaping of the relationship between citizens and their government. MacLean also argues that other political strategies like aggressive gerrymandering and the push for voter ID laws that tend to disenfranchise poorer and minority voters are not just partisan power plays. She contends that they are a core part of the Buchanan-Koch strategy. If you cannot convince the majority to vote for your unpopular economic policies, one way to achieve your goal is to make it harder for the people who disagree with you to vote at all. It is, in her view, a direct attempt to chain democracy by manipulating the rules of the game. The Philosophy and the Controversy. Democracy in Chains is a powerful and provocative book, and it is also a highly controversial one. Many libertarian scholars and supporters of James Buchanan and Charles Koch have fiercely disputed MacLean's interpretation of their work and their motivations. They argue that she has taken their words out of context, that public choice theory is a legitimate and valuable academic tool, and that their goal is not to destroy democracy, but to protect individual liberty for everyone. Our goal here is not to settle that debate. Instead, the value of this book for us as geeky philosophers is to use it as a lens to examine the deep and powerful questions it raises. The book forces us to confront one of the central tensions in any free society: the relationship between capitalism and democracy, between individual liberty and the will of the majority. What is the proper role of government? What are the legitimate limits on what a majority can vote to do? At what point does taxation become a form of theft, as libertarians might argue? And at what point does the protection of property become a form of oligarchy, as a progressive might argue? These are not easy questions, and Democracy in Chains is a story about one powerful and well-funded group's radical answer to them. The book is also a profound meditation on the power of ideas themselves. It is a story about how a set of abstract academic theories, when combined with immense wealth and decades of strategic patience, can have a real and dramatic impact on the world. It is a reminder that the biggest and most important battles are often not the ones we see on the news every day, but the long, slow, and often invisible battles over the ideas and philosophies that shape our society. Whether you agree with Nancy MacLean's conclusions or not, her book is a challenging and essential read. It is a call to pay attention, to look beneath the surface of our daily politics, and to understand the deep historical and philosophical currents that are pulling us into the future. It's an inquiry into the hidden architecture of power. If that is an inquiry that matters to you, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue to explore the powerful ideas that shape our world.